Hello everyone, welcome back to Alive City. Now today's lesson video will be continuing the lesson about the Apostle Paul. And this time we're going to learn about how he gets arrested and the reason why he gets arrested again. So before we go into that, you got to know the hearts of the Jewish people, because back then the gospel was only meant for the Jewish people, and it wasn't meant for no one else. So if you weren't a Jew, you were considered a Gentile. So there was only Jew and Gentiles. So yes, I would be considered a Gentile because I'm not a Jew. So since Paul was preaching the gospel to non-Jewish people, the Jewish people got upset with him and they plotted to kill him. So we'll be reading out of Acts 21 verses 27 to get the details on what they schemed up and the way they tried to get him killed. So here we go. Okay, so Acts 21 verses 26, the title of this is called Paul's Arrest. The 7 days were almost ended when some Jews from the province of Asia saw Paul in the temple and rose a mob against him. They grabbed him, yelling, "Men of Israel, help! This is the man who teaches against our people and tells everyone to disobey the Jewish laws. He speaks against the temple, and he even defiles it by bringing Gentiles in." For earlier that day, they had seen him in the city with Trophimus, a Gentile from Ephesus, and they assumed Paul had taken him into the temple. The whole population of the city was rocked by these accusations, and a great riot followed. Paul was dragged out of the temple, and immediately the gates were closed behind him. As they were trying to kill him, words reached the commander of the Roman regiment that all Jerusalem was in an uproar. He immediately called out his soldiers and officers and ran down among the crowd. When the mob saw the commanders and the troops coming, they stopped beating Paul. Okay, so what we just read was the Jewish people are upset with Paul. I mean, they're starting to riot, and the only thing that saved Paul was that the Roman guards had to come and save him from the crowd, because that's how mad and upset that they were. They were ready to kill him, and until the guards came and saved Paul. So once the guards got Paul and they took him away, Paul asked to speak to the crowd. He still wanted to reach out to the crowd and speak to the crowd to share something with them. So the guards let him speak to the crowd, and what he ends up doing, he shares his whole testimony about the road to Damascus, on how he encountered God on the road to Damascus and how he was blind. So he shares his whole testimony about that. And then once he comes to something where he shares his testimony about him having a vision with Jesus, and then Jesus tells him to go leave Jerusalem and to go and reach out to the Gentiles, that's when the crowd goes crazy once more, and we'll be reading from this right here. All right, so now we'll be reading out of Acts 22 verses 17. Now, this will be titled, Paul Speaks to the Crowd. You gotta keep in mind that he just got beat up and almost killed by the Jewish people. So even though he's all beat up, he's still going to speak to the crowd and share his testimony. And this is the last part of his testimony out of Acts 22, verse 17.
As Paul traveled all around telling people about Jesus, the Holy Spirit compelled him to return to Jerusalem. Paul didn't know why, but he had a sense that there was trouble ahead. When he arrived in Jerusalem, Paul went to the temple to share about how he had encountered Jesus on the road to Damascus. His story angered some of the Jews so much that they dragged Paul away from the temple and tried to kill him. Just before they could, a group of Roman soldiers arrived and arrested Paul. On their way to the jail, Paul asked if he could say something to the crowd that had gathered. The soldiers agreed, and Paul told them about his experience on the road to Damascus. When Paul told them that God called him to share God's message with non-Jews, called Gentiles, they started screaming for him to be killed. So the soldiers took him into the barracks. When they discovered that Paul was a Roman citizen, they became fearful of doing anything to harm him. This led to a series of courtroom battles where the Jews and Romans fought to decide what to do with Paul. Finally, Paul insisted that because he was a Roman citizen, he had the right to go to Rome and appeal to Caesar. As Paul awaited his trial in Rome, he was allowed to live at his own home, under house arrest. For over 2 years, Paul served others by inviting them into his home and telling them about Jesus and his message. Paul was eventually let go and began to travel again, but was quickly arrested and returned to Rome. This time, he was forced to live in a cold dungeon, chained like a criminal. Eventually, he was executed by the Roman government. Unfortunately, Paul wasn't the only apostle to be executed for what he believed and for telling others about Jesus. In fact, almost every one of the original disciples of Jesus was killed. All of them, except for one.
Alright, so that comes to the end of our lesson video for today. And yes, sadly, that comes to the end of the Apostle Paul. Now, back in Jerusalem over 2,000 years ago, he's the one that started the movement of the church that's still going strong till this day. And thanks for watching, and see you next time.
We'll be right back.